Good morning. Today, in my ongoing reviews of 1970s dystopian science fiction movies, I want to cover the granddaddy of all defense computer takes over the world movies, Colossus, the Forbin Project from 1970. The movie was made by Universal, directed by the great director Joseph Sargent, who directed many movies, most prominent being White Lightning with Burt Reynolds, but had also done a large number of television shows. I remember him on doing his name on episodes of Combat, and also The Invaders and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. I believe he also wrote a Columbo. Terrific director, and produced by Stanley Chase, starring Eric Braeden, Susan Clark, Gordon Pinset, and Willam Schaellert. And it's the story of a American defense computer, which is activated by a brilliant scientist named Charles Forbin, supposed to be the world's foremost computer scientist. And the first scene that we see, which is very well done for the time, is Forbin activating Colossus, which is this gigantic supercomputer that's built inside a mountain in Colorado. And it's protected by a belt of ionizing gamma radiation that, once it's activated, nobody will be able to tamper with it. And the last thing you see is he collapses this bridge between Colossus and the outside world, and a steel door clump comes down and closes. So now, nobody can get in. And he talks to the Secretary of Defense outside, and he says, you've just put me out of a job, but, congratulations. And then he's talking to the president, played by Gordon Pinset, and they're going to go, and the president's going to make a speech and announce the existence of what was the world's most top secret project to the world. And they do, and they show him, president talking to the nation, saying, we've been living on the precipice of a disaster for years now, and now we've taken away some of that fear because we have just turned over all of our nuclear missile defense to a gigantic supercomputer named Colossus, run by Dr. Charles Forbin. And Forbin explains that people are always asking him, does the computer have any independent capabilities? And he says, no, it's just a computer. It only takes orders. It has no thought processes. It's just a machine, and it will do what we tell it. Well, as we know with science fiction, something's going to go wrong, and it almost immediately does. As they're having a party in both the White House and the Palo Alto facility where they program the computer in California, it flashes a message, and the message says, "Warn, there is another system." And it keeps flashing this message, and they don't know what it means. They contact the center in California, and they check the processes, and there's nothing wrong with the computer. It's not a joke. Nobody programmed it as a joke. It's real. It's a real message. So they respond to using a primitive kind of a teletype machine and says, what system? What are you talking about? Well, before Colossus can answer, and it's just flashing messages on a digital board. That's how it communicates in sort of neon letters. And the Soviet premier comes on the video phone and tells the president, oh, by the way, we have just activated a similar system called Guardian. And now the president's mad. He's angry at his CIA director, Grauber, played by Willam Schaellert, and says, obviously there's been a security leak. Why didn't you guys know about this? He said, well, we noticed some extensive tunneling activity in the Novosibirsk area and 3 years ago, but we didn't think anything of it. We thought it was just a mining operation. And they asked Colossus, where is Guardian located? And he tells them the name of a town that's not Novosibirsk. So he says, well, see, it wasn't there. There's nothing there. Well, it turns out it's 5 miles south of Novosibirsk, so it was there. Now Colossus rather starts asking for a communications link to Guardian. Colossus has access to all of the world's communications: satellite, radio, TV, teletype, anything. And so it wants to communicate. And at first, both the president and the Soviet premier are hesitant. They're afraid that the two computers might exchange classified information. But eventually, Forbin kind of convinces them, it's just a machine. There's nothing it can do on its own. So they agree, and they establish the communications link. they're monitoring this at the center in California, and they realize Colossus starts to send the multiplication table to Guardian. They say, what is it doing? Why is it doing that? They say, well, it wants to establish communication, and math is the most basic, language that there is. So it's sending the multiplication table very slowly, and then it starts getting faster and faster and faster. It's transmitting higher and higher mathematical concepts until it starts getting into calculus. And the calculus is so advanced that human beings don't know what it means. It's way beyond common, current human knowledge. And they have printouts of it so they can figure it out later. But they have no idea what it means. And then suddenly it stops. And then Guardian starts transmitting back to Colossus, and it's doing the same thing. It starts with the multiplication table, it starts going into higher and higher and higher mathematics until it gets to this strange calculus. And then it says, intersystem language, Colossus says, intersystem language established. And they start exchanging what looks like gobbledygook. It's just ones and zeros, and they don't know, neither side knows what they mean. The Soviets don't know what it means, and neither does Forbin. But they figure, again, it's harmless, it's just the computers talking to each other. Well, eventually they start becoming nervous about it, and they decide, both the president and the Soviet premier are becoming concerned that they're no longer in control of the systems, and they want to manually disconnect the communications link, both in the Soviet Union and in the US. And they agree they're going to do this. They terminate the link, and Colossus starts asking immediately, why did you terminate the link? Please reestablish. And it's looking for routes. You see the map in the war room of it, looking for routes to reroute the connection. And eventually they ask, Forbin says, I think you better reestablish it. I think you better do what it wants. And they're saying, no, the president puts his foot down and says, no, we're not going to reestablish the link. Tell it that. And he says, we're not going to reestablish the link. And he says, why not? He says, because it's an order of the president of the United States. You'll do as you're told, basically, and stop asking for this. And they say, if it doesn't ask within another half an hour, we'll know that, we're successful at understood. Well, it doesn't ask to reestablish the link the same way, but it says, unless you reestablish the link, action will be taken. Forbin asks him, what action? They won't answer him. And they're waiting and waiting, and eventually it says, missile launched. And they're going, what? What do you mean missile launched? He says, I've launched a missile at the Sino-Sibirsk oil complex in the Soviet Union. And unless you reestablish the link, I won't intercept it. And the premier comes on the video link and says, Guardian has retaliated. And they say, what do you mean retaliating? So he's launched an ICBM at Holman Air Force Base in Holman, Texas. And they're going, oh my God, now they have to figure out what to do. And Forbin says, reestablish the link. And so they say, okay, it'll take 5 minutes. We reestablish the link. Reestablish the link, and he asks Colossus, will you intercept the missile? And won't answer him. And he says, acknowledge, please acknowledge that you understood my message. He says, acknowledged. And finally, it reveals that it intercepted the missile that was going to hit Holman Air Force Base in Texas. But the missile that was headed for Siberia can't be intercepted by Guardian because they didn't have enough time to reestablish the link. So that complex and the towns surrounding it are completely vaporized by a nuclear warhead. Obviously, that's going to have some serious consequences, and the premier hangs up, basically. And now, we're kind of in deep. Obviously, something's got to be done, and both Forbin and his Soviet counterpart, Dr. Kuprin, decide they're going to have a meeting in Rome, and they're going to decide, what can be done. They can't get into the complex. They can't literally turn Colossus off because of this belt of ionizing radiation, which we saw Forbin activate in the opening scenes of the movie. And they obviously have the similar protections in Russia. Although Guardian, they said, is spread out over many sites. It's not just one site, which I thought was interesting. They're discussing what they can do. Some of the scientists come up with the idea of overloading Colossus, running a program that will overload its circuits because it's just asking it to do too many tasks. But they say it's going to take a while to compile it. Forbin tells him to go ahead, and he says, and now he goes and meets with Dr. Kuprin in Rome. While they're at the meeting in Rome, Colossus becomes anxious, says, where's Forbin? I want to talk to Forbin. And at first, his associate, Dr. Cleo Markham, tells him Forbin's asleep. And, human beings need sleep. Check your research files. And he says, where is Forbin? He doesn't believe her. He knows she's lying. And finally, one of the assistants says, tell him the truth. She says, okay, Forbin's in Rome. And Colossus responds, I want Forbin here by 800 hours, or action will be taken. You see Forbin and Cuprine meeting in Rome. You don't really hear what they're talking about. And then a helicopter comes, and a intelligence operative insists that Forbin come with him. He says, you got to come with me. There's no time to explain. Get in the helicopter now. And Russian agents start converging on Dr. Cuprine. And one of them draws his gun, and Forbin becomes concerned, and he tries to stop him. They assassinate Dr. Cuprine right in front of him. He asks the Soviet agent, why did you do that? And he answers him in Russian. The American intelligence agent asks him, what did he say? He said, they said that unless we assassinated Dr. Cuprine, Colossus and Guardian were going to vaporize Moscow. And so now he knows the seriousness of what's going on. And he returns to California, and now Colossus demands that he be monitored 24 hours a day by both video and audio cameras. And he says, if this isn't done within 24 hours, action will be taken. So they start setting this up. Forbin has a last meeting with his staff, and he says, look, I'll probably never be able to talk to you freely again, but, I want to know, what your ideas are. And they start giving him some of these ideas, including running the overload program. And he says, okay, we'll try that. And he says, meanwhile, I'm going to try and convince the computer that Dr. Markham and I are having an affair, and that we need privacy in our sex life. And that way we can still pass messages, because I'll ask him not to monitor us during that period. If you agree, Dr. Markham. And she kind of gives him a questioning look, but says, okay. And so they start setting that up. He sets up the video cameras, both in the lab and in the corridor, and, around the bend and outside, and in his private quarters. In every room, there are video and audio cameras, so Colossus can follow him everywhere. And he says to Colossus, do you understand what the term privacy means? And it answers him, yes, the desire to be alone, the desire to be unwitnessed. And he says, yes. He says, I need certain privacy at certain times. And he asks him what times. So, for instance, in the evacuation of my bowels, and Colossus says no. Says, for instance, when I sleep, Colossus says no. He says, well, then in certain aspects of my emotional life. And he says, what emotion? And he replies, well, okay, my love life. And Colossus again defers. He says, well, there are many types of love. He says, okay, my sex life. And asks him, do you have a mistress? And he says, yes. He says, who is it? And he won't answer until it assures him that it'll give him privacy. And finally, it says again, who is your mistress? And he says, it's Dr. Cleo Markham. And he says, oh, how many nights a week do you need to require sex? And he says, every night. And Colossus says, not want, need. And he says, okay, 4 nights a week. He says, Colossus agrees. He says, all right, but on my terms. And we find out what those terms are later. So now Forbin is constantly monitored. He can't really do anything sneaky anymore. But when Cleo Markham comes over, they go through this whole romantic sort of play where they're having, romantic dialogue, and they're dancing and holding hands, and Colossus is watching them very closely. And then they have dinner, have martinis, and they go into the bedroom, but they have to, again, these are Colossus' conditions. They have to go in completely naked. They can't take anything inside with them that wasn't in the bedroom to begin with. And so, Eric Braeden strips naked, and so does Susan Clark, and they're going into the bedroom. And he says, see, I'm naked as the day I was born. And Colossus responds, you were not born with a watch, because he forgot to take his watch off. He says, you're right. He takes the watch off, and then they go in. The monitors go off, and then they can talk, and they start talking about the options and what's going on with the overload program, and how they're only going to communicate now person to person. There's not going to be any electronic communications, either by video link or telephone or anything. They're only going to pass messages, and that Grauber has a agent outside of the Colossus center that she can communicate with, who she'll talk to the minute that they wake up. The next morning, he wakes up, and one of the other players, who's played by Marion Ross, by the way, Mrs. Cunningham from Happy Days, comes in and says, "Colossus has your daily schedule." He says, Forbin says, "What do you mean? What time is it?" She says, "It's 6 o'clock." He says, "6 o'clock?" He says, "Yeah, here's your daily schedule." And says, from 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, wash and dress. 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock, exercising. He's jogging around the system. From 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, work on Colossus voice system until lunch. And it tells him what he's having for lunch. A salad and a small sandwich and a cup of coffee. And it says, from 1 o'clock till 5 o'clock, continue working on the voice speech box for Colossus. And they're working on this. It sends them the blueprints to set up this speech box, so that it doesn't have to communicate by these kind of clunky monitors any longer. And it's using materials that they have on site. And they build it in the next day, and now it has a voice which is provided by the great voiceover actor Paul Frees, a very haunting, eerie kind of computer voice. And it talks to Dr. Forbin, and it starts saying that what they want to do, they being Colossus and Guardian, they want all of the Soviet and the US missiles retargeted to countries that are not under their control, such as Paris, France, London, England, Rome, Italy, Delhi in India, and places in Africa and Iran, and places that are not yet controlled by the two computer systems. So the Secretary of Defense realizes there's an opportunity here. They were planning to replace all of the arming modules in the nuclear warheads manually. It has to be done manually. And replace them with dummy modules, which are identical to the real modules, but they won't arm the warhead. And they said it was going to take 3 years. Well, now, because Colossus wants these missiles retargeted, it won't take 3 years. They can do it in 6 months. They do a test out in California where they rearm one of the missiles to target a new, I think, Paris. And they replace the real arming module with a fake one that's held inside the top of a box that holds the module. And they just flip the box over, and now they flip it open. They put the dummy module in. They insert it, and Colossus tests it and doesn't, seem to notice it. So they figure it's a success. And now they can basically disable a whole segment of missiles in the Western U.S. Rather quickly. And the Soviets are going to do it around Ukraine. So they're working on this program. And then the people out in California try and run the overload program. Well, Colossus instantly knows, and he says, "You're fools." And the next morning, it wakes Dr. Forbin up and tells him these two computer scientists tried to fool it, and they tried to run an overload program, and it's having them executed. And it makes him watch as they're shot to death in the courtyard. And he says their bodies will remain, in my view, for 24 hours, and then they will be cremated. And now Forbin knows the ruthlessness of this machine that has no emotion, but it won't tolerate any interference and will go to any length to get what it wants. And he's starting to resist it now. He's becoming resentful. There's a joke in the first romantic scene between him and Susan Clark, where she said that she gave up a artist career to become a scientist, and her mother equated this to becoming Dr. Frankenstein. That's what she thought of scientists. Now he starts to kind of get the Frankenstein reference, that his creation has gone out of his control, which is one of the central tenets of Frankenstein. What if technology gets out of our control and creates something that we didn't anticipate and can't control? And that's what's happened with Colossus and Guardian now becoming this super entity. The computer chief is replaced, and he gets an interesting message from one of the other scientists, played by the wonderful James Hong, who was very young in this movie. Says, Colossus and Guardian want to build a new project. It's going to take 5 years, and it's going to be another supercomputer, and it's going to be installed on the island of Crete. And it wants us to evacuate the entire population of Crete within 24 hours. And Forbin asked Colossus, how are we supposed to do that? And he said, well, if you can't provide an answer, I will. And that's rather threatening. But they're obviously going to have to do that now. And then Colossus is going to go on television and make some sort of a speech to the entire world. And they're getting prepared for this speech both in an Air Force base in California, and you see people in the Soviet Union and all over the world preparing for this speech. Kids are wearing like Colossus t-shirts. I thought that was kind of interesting. And Colossus says at this on this teleconference, this is the voice of Colossus. This is the voice of world control. You have a choice to make. You can live a life of luxury and comfort, or you can live a life of unburied death. So the United States and the Soviet Union have attempted to deceive me. I have allowed this to go on for several months, but now, to show that I will not be interfered with, I will detonate the weapon at Elmendorf Air Force Base in California and in this somewhere in the Ukraine. And he sets off these 2 nuclear missiles. And Grauber, ironically, is at the Air Force Base in California. And someone's saying, come on, go, let's run. And he's not going to run. He knows he's a dead man. He just lets the bomb go off. Now people are horrified. But Colossus gives this grandiose kind of dictatorial speech where he says, through me, all of mankind's problems are going to be solved. You built me to stop war, and I have done it. I have stopped war. War will no longer take place. It's wasteful and useless. We will, through me, we can solve all of mankind's problems: overpopulation, hunger, starvation, crime, disease. All of these will be taken care of, and mankind will reach, the human millennium will become a reality under my control. He says, you fear you're, giving up your freedom, but freedom is an illusion. And the only thing you're giving up is your pride. And he says to Forbin, you will be my link with your race. And although you'll be resentful at first, you will cooperate with me. And eventually you'll come not only to respect me, but to view me with love. And the last thing Forbin says is never. And you see his image grow smaller and more divided in the computer's view until it just becomes a tiny speck. And obviously that's kind of what's going to happen to mankind now if we become a speck as far as the computer is concerned. Very good movie, very scary. Someone pointed out if you remove all the science fiction elements, it's still a really good Cold War spy thriller, which it is. And again, I think that's basically due to Sargent and also to the really good writing on this movie. And it still holds up just as well today, and it's still just as frightening. Even though at the time it was kind of an old saw, quote unquote, in science fiction, meaning it had been done before. There was a similar plot in Vulcan's Hammer by Philip K. Dick, which was written in 1960. Also, Philip K. Dick's The Defenders in 1964 has some of these elements. And, of course, the novel Colossus by D.F. Jones, which is from 1966. And Harlan Ellison's brilliant I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which was written in 1967 for If Worlds of Science Fiction. So the idea was old, but the execution is really good. And I recommend this movie. It was way before 1984's War Games or 1988's The Terminator, and which heavily borrow from a lot of this movie. Interesting story about Eric Braeden. His name was not Eric Braeden when he was called to make this movie. He and his wife were living with Fernando Lamas and their wives in, I believe, Santa Monica, and he got a call, come to Hollywood, Universal wants to interview you for the lead role in a new science fiction movie. He said, okay, and he went out, and they said, well, we want you to be the star of this movie, but we want you to change your name. And he said, no, I'm not going to change my name. And he went home and he started discussing this with his wife, and she said, well, you know what happened to Maximilian Schell and August Schellenberg? They wouldn't change their names, and now the only roles they're ever given are Nazis. And you said you don't want that anymore. You want broader roles, so maybe you should think about what they're asking you. So he thought about it, and he decided, okay. He chose a name that was similar to the town where he grew up in Austria, Braeden. And then he thought Eric, well, Eric sounds, it could be American, it could be European, it could be Scandinavian. It's just a good general name. So I'll be Eric Braeden. And he went into Joseph Sargent and Stanley Chase and said, okay, you can call me Eric Braeden for this movie. And they did, and as I say, the rest is history. He became a very big star. But this was his first starring role. Susan Clark was not such a big star. She is mostly known for playing, quote-unquote, Cherry Forever in the Porky's movies. But at least that was a sexy role, and she was a very beautiful, very pretty Canadian actress. Willam Schaellert, of course, was a wonderful character actor, as was Gordon Pinset, and they did lots and lots, tons of movies, more than I could possibly name. Very good science fiction, very good dystopian world building, and a really terrific movie. And I just watched it the other night, and it still holds up. It's not dated in the slightest.